Thank you, Michelle. So it is 5:15 or 4:15 my time. So I'm going to try, excuse me while I choke. I'm going to try and leave time at the end for a reasonable discussion on both this presentation and the next one. So it might be a bit of a whistle-stop tour through these slides. First of all, I've realized that I haven't actually said what certification is in this slide pack, and there are people on this call who will not be familiar with the background to certification. What CO-LaN is attempting to do here is improve the ability of components and environments to interoperate by certifying that the implementations of the standard are much more accurate and follow the standards, such that if you pick up a component and environment from two vendors and run them together, there's a much higher chance of them working together. Ultimately, the aim is to make sure they will work together, but I think there will be some learning on the way as we develop the certification process. A very quick background to certification. I'm not pointing at the, there we go. Now I'm pointing at the presentation so I can move on. So I was going to talk about the thoughts on how the certification process will work and the actors and interactions within that process. I'm then going to go on to a funding proposal, which is a development of things that have been heard at the last 2 annual meetings. And then, as I've already said, allow time for feedback and discussion at the end. So the process starts with the software developer. And I've carefully avoided the use of the word vendor here, because this may not be a vendor of CAPE-OPEN software. This may be an academic who is not a vendor developing their own software, but still wants to have their interfaces, their implementation of the CAPE-OPEN interfaces certified. So they download the CAPE-OPEN test suite. And I will come back to the test suite in the second presentation. I'm not going to describe it any further at this moment in time. They have an optional step. They can test their implementation during development, all the way through their development cycle. And they can run both CO-LaN provided tests, which may be the mandatory ones for certification, and optional ones covering things like best practice. And they also have the optional ability to add their own tests if they want to go beyond certification for some reason. So they can do that all the way through the development cycle and improve the QA process on CAPE-OPEN implementations. They then run the test suite on their final release candidate of a version of the software using the standard certification tests provided by CO-LaN. So there will be some mandatory certification tests that at this stage have to be run. And it is based on the success and failure of those tests whether the certificate is granted. So they run the software using the certification tests, they get a test report, and they submit it to the Chief Certification Officer, which is a new role, which again I will come back to. So that's what the software developer has to do. The Chief Certification Officer will then review that test report submitted by the software developer. And as an aside here, we would not expect the CCO to have to rerun the tests themselves. They're not going to have the developed component or environment sitting on a CO-LaN laptop or whatever so they can run the tests themselves. It completely relies on the software developer submitting that report. They will, however, the CCO will, however, request additional information or clarification if they require it. When the CCO is happy that the test report demonstrates compliance, they will grant the certificate for the version and only the version of the software that was tested. They'll notify the software developer and they'll publish the result on the certification website. Where that certification website is not yet decided. It will probably be hosted within the current CO-LaN website. I can't see any reason not to. but it might be a subdomain, it might be a separate page, whatever. That's not decided. But there will be a site somewhere where we can publish the results of the certification process. And that will say version XYZ of software, whatever, has been certified. And that is all it will say. It will not even publish the results of the tests done. There will be a feedback loop if compliance is not established. There could be two reasons we've come up with why you might not get compliance. There may be changes required to the software that has just been tested to ensure compliance if something has not been implemented following the standard. Equally well, as I said earlier, this will be an iterative process of getting us to a point where we can guarantee compliance. We might find that the test suite needs modifications. In that case, the CCO may grant the compliance certificate, even if the test report for some reason shows non-compliance, if it's because of the test suite, so that the software developer, the vendor, doesn't have to wait for us to update the test suite before they get their certificate, which would be a major roadblock in the process of releasing new versions of software. So that is a very quick run through of the actual process that will be followed by certification. And you will have already seen that we have a new role, the Chief Certification Officer. And this diagram probably is quite difficult to see. I've got a blown up version of it in a second. But this talks about the role of the Chief Certification Officer, how they interact with the software developers, how they interact with the interoperability SIG and the other SIGs within CO-LaN, and what the Chief Certification Officer is responsible for. So if I zoom in a little bit on that top half of that, the first thing about the Chief Certification Officer, it should be independent from the Management Board, the interoperability SIG, the Chief Technology Officer, and the software developers, to ensure that they have credibility. And they will be responsible for the execution and communication with respect to the certification, both the granting of certificates and the processes behind the certification. I know we've mentioned in the past a certification SIG. This proposal does not include a certification SIG. The Chief Certification Officer is responsible for everything around certification. They will communicate with the software developers and they will get feedback and input from the software developers, but there will be no formal SIG, which avoids any conflicts of interest or certain developers having a greater influence on certification than others and all these sorts of things. The Chief Certification Officer will report to the Management Board and will be advised by the Chief Technology Officer. So I will come back to the interoperability SIG in a second. Certification itself consists of the certification process and policy, which the Chief Certification Officer will be responsible for defining. They will be publishing the results on the certification website, and they will be requesting developments to the test suite based on requirements from the software developers and feedback from the certification process. They will also be negotiating with the interoperability SIG, because it's the interoperability SIG that will have the responsibility for managing and maintaining and developing the test suite. So the Chief Certification only requests development. The interoperability SIG will be responsible for making those developments. As already said, there is no certification SIG. If there are any challenges to the certification decisions by the CCO, the resolution will be provided by the Management Board and or the CTO. So a software developer who disagrees with the decision of the Chief Certification Officer will have a way of challenging that decision. So that's the top half of the diagram. and that's the bottom half of the diagram. And this is the role of the interoperability SIG in this new organization. So the interoperability SIG will be responsible for the technical aspects of certification, i.e. the test suite, and making sure the test suite is consistent with all the remaining interoperability tools. And there's a word missing in there. Should say interoperability tools. And the interoperability SIG will have its leader and its members as it currently does. So the interoperability SIG will negotiate with the Chief Certification Officer on the scope of certification and what technical things need to be provided. They'll verify the certification process and policy, and they will develop the test suite. Now the CTO sits within that interoperability SIG by default. The CTO is always a member, so the CTO in this respect is having a direct input into the test suite and the certification process and policy on top of its role of advising the CCO. The final thing here is that obviously we've got to define what tests need to be implemented within the test suite to prove that we have a compliant piece of software. Definition of those tests will be the responsibility of the other SIGs. It's not for the interoperability SIG to define what the tests should be. For example, the Thermo SIG will define the tests required for certification for the Thermo PMC, or the Thermo interfaces. It will not be the interoperability SIG. And it will also be their responsibility to ensure that we have traceability of the tests back to the original textual specification. So this whole process will rely on each of the other SIGs defining what tests are required against the textual specifications for which they are responsible. So that is the scope of certification. I'm just going to hop back 2 slides. So we have the Chief Certification Officer, who is independent and will execute the process and request developments to the test suite. The software developers will have the ability to interact with the Chief Certification Officer to make sure that their needs are being met. The Chief Certification Officer will report to the Management Board, whilst the interoperability SIG will be responsible for delivering the technical aspects of certification. So we are only creating one new role. So that's now covered the process, the interactions, the actors and the interactions between them. And the third area I need to cover today is the funding model. And this has moved on a bit. So the proposal is that the test suite, we'll start with the test suite, will be available to all CO-LaN members of any category and can be used on software. The license agreement will say it can be used on software owned by a CO-LaN member only. So either the CO-LaN member is actually using the test suite or any other. So somebody who is running that test suite could run it on behalf of another CO-LaN member if they wanted to. It will not be available to non-members of CO-LaN, but non-members can join CO-LaN to obtain access. And the thing this doesn't say, but is implied there is no additional cost to a CO-LaN member for use of the test suite. Your current membership fees will cover it. So it becomes a benefit of the current CO-LaN annual membership fees, which are in place until 2025. There will need to be no separate commercial arrangements for the use of the test suite or licensing. You don't need to sign a license. It will come with a license, but you do not need to sign a license for use of the test suite. It will be there automatically through your membership of CO-LaN. This model will be reviewed in 2025 when the current membership model, funding model, is reviewed. at the latest. If things change in the meantime, it might have to be reviewed earlier, but that is my expectation. We will continue with this model at least until 2025. So on the positive side, this funding model gives everybody a positive benefit of their annual membership fee, another positive benefit of their annual membership fee, and you need no separate commercial arrangements. We don't need to sign contracts or anything like that for the use of the test suite. Two downsides. One, a potential full member who is not a current member is going to have to pay the full membership fee to get access to the test suite, which is maybe a significant commitment. But I'm expecting the test suite will be used most of the time by vendors, software developers, associate members, where where the membership fee is nowhere near as high. And it could be this way of providing the test suite could be circumvented if a CO-LaN member organization uses the test suite on behalf of a non-member organization. It will be covered in a license, the license under which the test suite is made available, but that's obviously got to be policed, or everybody's got to be on best behavior not to do it. So that's funding of the test suite. On the funding for the request for certification, we don't actually know how much it's going to cost. How much is that CCO role going to cost CO-LaN? Because how much of a full-time job, part-time job is it? We don't actually know until we start doing it. So initially, the plan is unlimited requests by any CO-LaN member for certification. It will be allowed, but that will be subject to annual review depending on the experience and the cost to CO-LaN of providing the certification. One option may be in the future to possibly limit the number of requests per organization per year if it becomes expensive. However, I'm not expecting it to take very long for the CCO to review the test report and to say, yes, this meets the requirements or this doesn't meet the requirements. So that's how CO-LaN members will get certification. Organizations that are not members of certification cannot request certification because they can't produce a certification report because they don't have access to the test suite. They will have to join CO-LaN to be allowed to certify their software. So the pros of this, there is no barrier to requesting certification for CO-LaN members. And again, there is no additional cost beyond CO-LaN annual membership fee. The other pro that's not on here is that we don't have to put any other commercial arrangements in place for certification. You don't have, CO-LaN members don't have to pay in another way, and non-members just join to get certification. Although that may be seen as a barrier, but it's not a very big barrier, and they could be charged just as much for one-off certification as a non-member as they will be required to pay to join CO-LaN. And as I've already said, we don't know how much the certification process is going to cost, and the CO-LaN membership fee may not be sufficient to cover the cost. Hence the initial comments about we need to review annually to find out how much it is costing us as we go forward. So that's the funding proposal. Up the third section of the funding proposal. We could, and this is not core to the funding proposal, which is why I'd forgotten it was in here. We could offer a service to both members and non-members to run the tests on their behalf and provide certification. So the software developer would provide their software, CO-LaN would install it on a machine and test it. And they would get charged for the man hours required, probably at a premium, to actually do that testing and providing the certification. The pros, it allows certification for software developed by non-members and for members who do not have the resources to make use of the test suite. It gives an additional income stream for CO-LaN if we do charge a premium over the straight man-hour rates, but it would be complex for CO-LaN to provide such a service. my thoughts is CO-LaN certainly doesn't provide this service initially. We take a couple of years to see how certification is running before we do that. So that's 3 parts to the funding proposal: how we fund the test suite, how we fund certification, and whether we need a certification service and how we would fund that. Final slide. It's previously been suggested that the test suite should be open source. That is actually incompatible with limiting access to the test suite to CO-LaN members, because if you provide the source, certainly if you do it by the normal open source ways, then anybody can build the test suite, and we've suddenly gone straight beyond only providing it to non-members. So the proposal is therefore to provide the binaries only at this time. We could consider writing the license agreement so that it allows access to the source for CO-LaN members, and that adds unnecessary complexity. But we do have to write a license for the test suite anyway. And I think the open sourceness of the test suite should be reviewed whenever we review the funding model, because if we change the funding model, that may totally change the way we provide the software. So with that, 22.5 minutes in, I think I'm perfect timing to get feedback and see how much discussion there is. And 3 things I wanted feedback on. I'm welcome feedback on anything, but feedback on the certification process itself. Is the role of the CCO correct? And thoughts on the funding proposal. Thank you.